Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be working on the next step of our Orca, which is filling in the shading using a couple other graphite pencils and a light source. So we're going to create an imaginative light source, which if you added the sun into your drawing, then you already have it in the very background. Your light source is going to be coming from behind, cascading into the water. We're not going to focus too much on the water below. We're going to just focus on the top surface of the water, a little bit of some energy coming off the sun, and then really shading in our Orca. And I'm going to be showing you just a couple of materials that you'll need. If all you have is a number 2 pencil, just like a normal pencil with an eraser, you can still follow along and do all of these steps. You just might not get quite as dark of a contrast as you will if you had the full set of pencils. So I will share with you those extra pencils in case you have them or you want to purchase them. If not, just hold tight, or you can go ahead and skip ahead just a few minutes, and then we can get right into doing our graphite shading drawing. So this is going to be what our drawing looks like when we're all done. And to make this drawing, obviously we use a number 2 pencil, but as we started to develop it, we kind of moved into a couple other pencils, and I will share those with you right now. The extra materials that you'll have will be these guys right here. So a normal number 2 pencil is first one you need, and then you also need an eraser. And then I would say get a 2B pencil. So a 2B is actually a bit darker than a number 2 pencil. So the spectrum when it comes to graphite pencils is if you have an H, it's harder, and if you have a B, it's going to be softer, which means it's softer in its actual, what's the word I'm looking for? It's softer in its material. So the material means that if it's softer, the more dark the pencil is. If it's harder, the more light the graphite that comes off that pencil will be as well. So it's really fun, really interesting to play with all of the spectrum. But today we're just going to keep it simple with just a few other ones. We're mostly on the darker side since we're dealing with mostly a black animal with heavy shading. So have your number 2 pencil, and then get a 2B pencil. I'm using Cretacolor because I personally just really love this brand. It's just my favorite one since the entire pencil is graphite rather than the centerpiece. So you can use every edge and side of this pencil like it's graphite. And now the next one you're going to want to have in your kit is a 6B pencil. And a 6B pencil is obviously going to be darker than a 2B pencil. And it is a great, it's great for getting in those pretty dark darks, but it's not your completely darkest dark, so it still has a bit of shine to it. If you use a 9B, my little baby 9B, 9B is great for getting those blackest blacks in. This is where you're going to have your most contrast coming from this guy or an ebony pencil that also is exactly the same thing. But we won't be using too much of this guy. If you were going to go have some crazy fun with it, then please do. But also know that you can use these 2 guys right here. These are tools for blending in your graphite. So these blenders right here are great for feathering. Sound effects help, I promise. Doing this nice little bit of soft blending with a very soft, typically a watercolor brush. Or using this guy right here, which is just a little blender tool. It's basically just rolled up cardboard. And so you can use this guy to do really teeny tiny little blending areas if you don't want to do an entire area. So I'll be showing you how to use these guys as we develop our new drawing. And obviously I'll show you how to handle these guys as we go along as well. So let's go ahead and get into our Orca and let's start drawing. Now we're going to get started using just a number 2 pencil. So number 2 pencil is just normally it's like an HB pencil is what it's called. And just grab any old pencil and you can start filling in our beginning shading areas. And keep in mind you want to go from your lightest shade to your darkest shade whenever you're working with graphite, just because it'll allow for you to really softly build up to color rather than putting in a really harsh line and not ever being able to get it to blend in properly. So this is the process of creating a proper blending gradient with graphite. So you see I'm starting up top, and this is just because it's going to help me keep my hand from getting as dirty if we just go ahead and get what's above and over to the left, or if you're left-handed, what's above and over to the right done first. Obviously our sun's not going to be our sun's not going to be shaded in. So, but I still like to sometimes put some fun little movement marks kind of coming off of it to give that feeling of radiate. Like it's radiating light, radiating heat, sun. There we go. So just some little squiggles there, kind of be fun. Don't feel like you have to do that. I'm just showing you something that you can do. So I'm going to go ahead and define my water a little bit more. And that's pretty much just following some of the lines that we've already created before. And this is, do not overthink this part because it's fairly simple. Just kind of darken in the lines where you've already used a sketch. And whenever it reaches like a little point area, just kind of make that area a little bit darker than the softer portions on the in this length right there. Now obviously you're going to want to make the one that's where the dorsal fin is pretty dark because it's in shadow. But you're going to want to leave this one right here highlighted still, because if you darken it up, it's going to just blend in with your orca. So there's a fine line between where you blend and where you don't blend. There are no hard rules necessarily, because this is, again, art, so you can create whatever you want. Just keep in mind you want to make it make sense to the viewer and to your eye. So if you have a gut feeling that you're like, I think that looks good, just go with it. Have fun with it. This is learning. You're here to learn. You're here to explore. So don't constrain yourself so early on. Be free-flowing and enjoy the process. It'll take time for you to really understand your materials and your techniques, but you can enjoy every step of that process. So don't overthink it. Just have fun and relax. I'm going to darken that up right there. So you see, again, I'm just kind of following the lines that we already had. Adding in a few more, darkening in those little points. All right, so now that you have that beginning portion in up top, we're gonna go ahead and start, again, shading in that dorsal fin a little bit more. Go ahead and leave a light highlight going down the front of the dorsal fin so that you can have a bit more form and perspective on your orca. Go ahead and bring that all the way down. And then darken it up at the very bottom where the dorsal fin is connecting to the body. Once that's in, we're going to go ahead and continue that shading with just a slight white area that you don't fill in up top. And even kind of around the blowhole, kind of go around that a little bit, and then you can go ahead and connect your shadow, this light shadow, over to the side of the head over here. And we're going to go ahead and darken up all of this area. So if you're curious as to how I'm holding this brush, I am using a interesting technique. It's kind of a sort of like a crosshatch, which crosshatching, I will grab this guy right here. Crosshatching is basically the act of creating lots of these little marks like this. Cross-hatching is literally exactly what it is, creating a bunch of little crosses over the top of each other, and it creates depth and shading over time. Because I don't like doing these harsh lines, and I think they show up at the end. They can be a very cool aesthetic, don't get me wrong, but for more realistic, soft gradients, I like to do a more circular motion, like this. And so instead of X, 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 it's more like a circle, 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 and over and over and over again. And you get this same effect, except as you see here, it's a lot softer to its darkest point, and it's easier to get back into shading if you step away from your paint, or your drawing for a little while, and then you come back. It's easier to start shading in the exact same angle and way. And note that whenever you're doing your graphite, if you have a very sharp pencil, you'll get really harsh marks like this from the very beginning. So I like to sometimes hold my pencil to the side and just very fast, very quickly do this, and to wear down the side of your pencil to have a nice flat area. And that gives you a really nice starting point for doing these circular cross-hatching techniques like that. All right, so hop back to our new drawing. All right, so go ahead and finish out down here around the body. Leave the eye area highlighted for now, because we're going to do a little bit more fine tuning and fine work in there. Of course, leave the patches. Go ahead and fill in this entire area as well. And now, instead of doing these, I'm doing little circle movements. I'm doing much longer, but still very light circular movements. So it's almost like a line, but it's actually a very elongated oval that I'm using to create form using following the length of the body. So I'm going horizontal with the horizontal body, following the curves. Whereas if I was going like at an angle, if I was going this way, it would throw off the look of your drawing. So follow the body wherever you can. All right, so we're gonna go ahead, finish in all down here and up here on the top as well. And then again, leave a little sliver of pure white along the very top. And even a little bit of the line right here going to the tail isn't a bad thing either. And then you can actually go ahead and fill in that outside little dog ear area, and then come back to our big old paddles and fill those in. And fill in that back pectoral fin as well. All right, so this is our first layer of graphite, and it's looking pretty good. So now what we're gonna do is go back over again with the same number 2 pencil and darken up some key areas before moving on to our next pencil. And again, if you don't have this full pencil set, it's not a problem. You can still follow along all the way to the end and have a pretty similar effect. You'll just have to hold your pencil a lot more hard to the paper, and just be a bit careful when it comes to creating too harsh of an edge, because you'll indent your paper eventually. I wrought back. So we're gonna keep filling in. And if you're at home and you notice that you're starting to get some smudge marks from your hand, all you need to do is grab a rag, or a very clean rag obviously, or grab a paper towel, fold it up a couple times and put it under your hand. And that will really help alleviate some of the smudging that happens whenever you're using graphite. It's gonna happen pretty much no matter what, unless you can completely raise your hand off of the drawing. But to be honest, you should be using your surface for your hand, because it allows for you to maintain a steady rhythm when it comes to filling in your graphite and shading. It's not a rule. Again, that's just my personal preference, but I just find I would rather deal with a little bit of a slight smudge and really get the look I'm going for, and then go back in and erase it later. It's not a big deal, so I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about it. And so by putting in this next layer of dark, which here is that midline we were talking about earlier, we're going to use that to darken up, because that's actually the intersection between the upper body and the lower body, and it's a muscle going from the top, and then down here is the belly. So it's going to have a little bit of an indent there where that muscle is. So we're going to fill that in with some of that darkness. And follow it all the way down to the very bottom of this tail. Maybe we can add a little bit of dark on the top as well, but not too much. More coming from the bottom. And again, this is just our HB pencil still. So this HB pencil will get you a very long way before you really need to switch over to a darker pencil to get like super heavy darks, which you won't even notice until you do it for the first time. And you're like, wow, that is so much darker, and it creates so much more contrast. But this is absolutely the way to learn, is with a HB, simple materials, and then just painting and drawing things that you love and getting inspiration from other artists. So whenever you're just starting out, I think that it's a great idea to find artists that you would like to emulate, and even kind of like, I wouldn't say copy their drawings and try to sell them or anything, but you can definitely get a lot of inspiration by mimicking somebody's style of work. And from that mimicry, you can develop your own style, or get a jump start into developing your own style. I'm going to lightly go on the pectoral fin again. At this point in the process, it's really just about filling in your areas. So giving yourself a good base to build up darker shading on. And make sure that you fill in that back pectoral fin over here really dark. Orcas actually have completely black pectoral fins on both sides, which I did not know till more recently. So do not leave it white, because they're not white. And I'm going to darken up the bottom of the pectoral fin over here. Just like so. I'm going to come up here one more time. Darken a bit more around the belly. But make sure to leave those markings still free of any graphite, because we're going to tackle that a little bit later once we get in some of our darker colors. I'm sorry, darker shading. Now we're going to move on to the 2B. So the 2B pencil is going to be used to just even go darker. So you see already defined to be so much darker than that HB. So we're going to go ahead and start going over a lot of the areas that we already did. We're going to cover a lot of the Orca again with this particular pencil. because it's going to smooth out some of the transitionary areas, especially whenever we get to our darkest dark, that 9B, and even the 6B, you'll be able to see it as well. Let's go ahead and bring it all the way up the dorsal fin, and you can even kind of bring a few kind of striations coming down, creating form on the dorsal. We're not going to really hit too much in the higher area up here anymore because we want to keep that pretty bright because that's where the sun is casting onto the top of our orca. But because we're working with a black animal, we are going to be having a heavier hand than I would normally suggest for these graphite drawings for other pieces. I've done a manta before as well, and it was very similar, how you had to handle the mix between what's color or really black actually is a absence of color. It's truly not even a color. So black is not a color, it's just a way to understand it. Black is the absence of all color and light, which is fascinating. But for the sake of just making it easy, we call it a color. And then white, fun fact, is actually all of the colors being absorbed by the object. So meaning all of the light, all the colors in the light spectrum are being absorbed by this paper, so we see it as white, like how we see the sun. It's actually all colors, so the sun appears to be white. And so if you wanted to imagine an idea for color theory, it would be, let's say we're looking at a red apple. Why it's red to our eye is because every other color in the spectrum, such as blue, green, purple, yellow, etc., are being absorbed by the red apple, except for red. And red's being bounced back into our eye, and the way our eye reads it is red. And so the actual colors that we see objects as isn't actually that they're that color, it's that they actually repel that color back to our eye, which is just fascinating. I bet you guys didn't think you were going to get a color theory lesson today with a black and white graphite course. So going back into our pectoral fin, darkening up that edge really, really nicely. Awesome. And then we're actually going to add a little bit of some interest here by creating these like little kind of scratchy areas that form kind of a curve going towards the beginning of the pectoral fin. So if you want to think of it like a fish, how would the fish have like little lines going through their fins? We're kind of doing the same effect except without the little tiny lines, because obviously an orca is not a fish. So they have similar kind of structures within their paddles, within their pectoral fins. And so we can bring those out a little bit with shading especially. Like that. Over here. And the inspiration for this piece is actually the southern resident orcas that live in Vancouver, or just out of Vancouver. They depend heavily on salmon run every year, and are actually one of the most endangered populations of orca in the world because of their extreme dependence on one food source. They will actually not eat seals. Obviously other populations of orca actively hunt seals, but this population does not. And because of that, they are actually suffering from starvation due to dams being built and withholding the salmon run from coming down the river every year. So this species of, not even a subspecies technically of orca, this subspecies of orca is one of my favorites. And I think that their story is really important, and they're just such amazing animals. So you should check them out. You can Google them and learn more about their situation and even ways that you can help. And even art is a great way to communicate science and education. So if you love your artwork that you create here today, maybe you share it with them organizations trying to help protect these orcas and showing your love for this amazing animal. We're going to darken up this area a little bit more. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, I think we're good with our 2B pencils. Now we're going to go to the 6B. Okay, our 6B pencil now. Or I'm sorry, yeah, there we go. 6B pencil is what we're going to be using next. So now this one, we are all done with our water and with our sun. So we're focusing completely on our orca at this point. So this one we're going to be using even less of, but even so, there'll be a few key parts that just desperately need that really, really dark shade. Like under the belly here, I'm going to heavily be placing in this shade. So you see how nice and heavy that dark is down there and how nicely it's fading and shading up into our previous layers. That's because we took all that time to develop up those lighter layers first. If we had jumped right into doing this really dark one, it would have taken a lot longer to fill in this dark area, and B, you would have ended up having more of this grainy look up here and this dark area, which just doesn't necessarily communicate what we want at this point. Now, of course, that can be an aesthetic choice as well. So please always feel free to take a piece your own way if you want to experiment. Again, darkening up that back fin. All right, go ahead and make that bottom of the dorsal fin super dark and bring that up a little bit more. We're also going to really darken up this part of the tail, little dog ear. Take away some of that highlight. And we're also going to go ahead and darken up the muscle right here a little bit more. And we will be bringing a little bit of the 6B up into this light area, just a hint, just a little bit over the patch. And I'll be showing you a fun way you can kind of blend that too in just a minute. So obviously we can't forget about our big ol' happy fins right here, the big ol' flippers. And you're going to do a really, really dark line, guys, on that pectoral fin. Just be careful whenever you're putting it in that you're not going to accidentally put a heavy mark stretching off to the side, because whenever you're working with these softer graphites, you'll have a very hard time getting them to erase. So know that after probably about like a 4B, maybe not even a 4B, you're going to have a pretty difficult time erasing these heavy marks when you put them down. So definitely take it slow, and you will be rewarded with a really, really lovely piece. Okay, this is looking pretty awesome. So let's go ahead and switch over to our darkest, which is our 9B, which you can like barely see there. So this is going to be used super lightly. I say super lightly, I mean like very lightly. Like we probably almost don't even necessarily need it for this piece because we're not going to be doing a ton of tiny details. But if you were doing a very detailed orca, especially on a larger piece, you would absolutely need this 9B. So again, this is just another super dark pencil. If you want to see what it looks like, just going into this white a little bit, that's how dark it is. And it's also the softest pencil that we're going to be using today. Again, the softest pencils are always the ones that are darkest. And then the hardest pencils are the ones that are lightest. We're going to want to darken up the pupil as well. There we go. And at the base, the dorsal, and I'd say even right down here at the very, very bottom of the tail where the fluke is. Bring it up a bit. It's like that. All right. And then maybe just a little bit right here on the outside edge for definition. And then I think that's it for our graphite pencils. So next, before we go in and erase anything, we're gonna take our very soft watercolor brush, any kind of watercolor brush, doesn't matter, doesn't need to be anything fancy. Gonna take it and very lightly sit here and pull your graphite into your lighter areas, starting from the bottom and coming up. You'll start to see that nice, lovely, soft transition. But know that you do not need to do this if you don't want to. You can completely keep the transition we made by hand, and that works perfectly and it looks lovely. I'm just showing you different ways you can approach doing gradients and creating effects and using tools for getting the look that you want with your piece. And then I even like to take it whenever we're at this point. You can take that brush from all these dark areas, and it has a little bit of that graphite loaded up on it, and pull it into your white areas to create shadow. Now, obviously you don't need to do that, but I will also show you how to do that with the pencil here in just a moment. All right, and you can also do this along the top of your water. And you can create a little bit of like a gradient shade coming down into the water as well. And then coming over here into the pectoral fin, you can very gently and lightly pull back some highlights there. Up top on the dorsal fin, on the back of the tail, a little bit right there. Clean up the top of that pattern right there. And also I'd clean up the pattern right here if you got a little bit of a scratchies right there. And then just go around and touch up any little smudgies that may have made their way into our water or our white space. See, and me right there. I just flicked it, but I pulled more graphite in. And take your time doing this. You don't have to rush through it. I'm just going a bit fast so I can complete the piece and show you all the techniques. And always feel free to ask me any questions during the process. Just timestamp where you're at in the question that you had or the technique that we were doing, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Perfect. And now at this point, you are pretty much done. You can just do a couple little added touches. Like as I was looking at my sun, I decided that my sun was maybe a bit too long. I wanted to shape that up a little bit more. Just like that. And you can do something like add in some little fish if you would like to add in some fish. And those are basically just going to be little ovals that can stack on top of each other with a little fork at the end or a little pokey stick. Just like that. And you can fill them in just the same way that we did here. I would say you can probably just shade them all in one shade color, like HB, with ones behind other fish being obviously darker and the ones in front being the lightest shade. So you don't have to worry about necessarily creating a whole ton of detail when you're doing these little fish with like a big animal. Sometimes their gesture of just being there can create extra movement in your piece that helps move your eye around and guide people to interesting spots, or just in general creates a lot of movement and life and interest throughout the entire piece. I hope you enjoyed learning how to shade in your own orca today. If you enjoyed this lesson and you want to see more like it, please hit that subscribe button and follow us at Paint for the Wild. We're also on Instagram and Facebook under Paint for the Wild as well. If you have any questions about what we went over today, such as materials, a shape, or a technique, then please comment below and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you would like to see the links to all of our artworks and our drawings, then follow the description below for more info there. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I can't wait to draw or paint with you again soon. See you later, guys.